Excellent, thank you. Welcome, guys. I'm Shinoo Mapleton. Welcome to InnoKinetic. Thanks for coming. We're here to talk to you today about the Porsche 996 Road Rallye spec that we're building right now. Let me give you a little bit of background about us. I see a lot of Porsche guys here. When I started this business back in 2004, it was really focused on the Lotus Elise and then the Exige that came from that. I'm a 40-year veteran of the auto industry. Those of you guys that know me know I'm a little bit of a character when it comes to what I like. I'm very, very specific about my interests, and sports cars are right at the top of the list of my passions. And so growing up in Detroit, you know, muscle cars were everywhere, right? But somehow I grew an affinity for sports cars that actually handle. You know, the 911 was, if I'm honest, was my first dream sports car. But when the Lotus Elise was introduced, I gravitated to that car, which was in the mid-90s, and that was a Series 1 car. But it was not until the Series 2 car did they bring them to the States. So I had one on order for years. It showed up. I started developing parts for the car. Okay, from wheels to brakes, suspensions, exhaust systems. I mean, have a peek at that red car behind you guys. That's one of our 111 RSs, which, if you're familiar with the company like Roof, that's kind of our version. You know, we take a base, fundamentally good car, and then we upgrade it with all of our parts. Okay, so we moved into this building over a year ago. We bought it and started setting it up so that we can start supporting other like-minded sports car guys, people who are into driving. That's really our focus. We love driving sports cars. This is the thing. The thrill of driving these things, whether it's in the canyons or on a racetrack, that's, if I'm honest, where my passion truly lies. But taking road trips is something, it's one of my fondest memories are the road trips I've taken all over this country. And so, anyways, we decided to enter the Porsche space after many, many years. I joined the PCA in the late 90s when I had a 993. So for those of you who are familiar, those cars are the last of the air-cooled Porsches, right? I had that car when these 996s were introduced. And I was in the camp like, oh my God, what's with those headlights, you know? I didn't have a problem with the water. There's a perception that, you know, out in the market that there are unreliable cars and you don't want to buy them because of the IMS bearing, blah, 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 and other things, bore scoring, you name it, okay? And that perception has somewhat become reality. You know, the values of these cars have plummeted as a result of that, which is a good, you know, thing if you're an enthusiast who's interested in driving and don't want to pay the premiums that you're kind of having to pay nowadays for Porsche. So these things are really a wonderful value in the market because of that perception that exists out there, okay? And that's one of the reasons why we chose this car as well, as opposed to moving straight into some of the other cars, 997s, or even the older cars, 964s, 993s. We thought, hey, this is a car that I think has unjustifiably been hammered by the market's perception of its unreliability. So we can fix these things. We can make them really good drivers' cars. So that's why we started with the 996. Okay, this particular car is a 2000 model year. Very high mileage car. So we were able to get it for a song, I mean, $15,000. Okay, cosmetically the car is pretty bad too, okay? But our intention with what we're doing with the car, and that's build it into what we call a Road Rallye spec car, you know, basically means we're going to be modifying this car, okay? We're not keeping it stock. All right, and we know for some of the purists out there, and certainly for the value of a car, the more stock it is, generally it's more valuable, right? In our case, we're not so worried about that because we're going to make it into something that's a bit different. So finding a high mileage car that was beat down was actually kind of the perfect donor for us, okay? So anyway, so what is this Road Rallye spec that we're talking about? You know, I kind of, wrote about it up here. California, everyone, there's a perception that California roads are really great, and they are really fun. But one of the cold hard realities is that there's a lot of beat up roads, broken asphalt, potholes, issues that you've got to navigate and frankly manage if you're driving a car aggressively. You're just cruising around, okay, whatever. Other than the ride quality being a bit bumpy. But if you're really hooning a car and you're just getting after it, those are issues that you got to manage, okay? And most sports cars are set up low and stiff, and they're not as compliant as they could be to really navigate those type of conditions well, okay? So our intention here is to develop this car to manage those kind of conditions, and that's why we decided to focus on what I call a Road Rallye spec, okay? So that's a car that is going to have a little bit more clearance on the road. So we're going to lift this car about 1 inch, okay? It's going to have a more compliant suspension, okay? But that compliance is what's going to give us grip, which is what's going to allow us to be able to drive quickly through these canyons, okay? Most of these safari builds that you see out there, they're really more off-road oriented, whereas we're more on-road oriented. So I'm trying to, I'm considering 90% on-road, 10% groomed trails, okay? This is not a car you could take to Baja, okay? It's not going to succeed there, but it is going to succeed, in the canyons here, okay? Our intention is to make something that handles better than a standard C2, not quite as good as a GT3, but it'll be more compliant than a GT3. Okay, so we're striking that balance right in there. So it's going to take some effort. A lot of the safari builds out there, as an example, I mean, this is one of the issues that I can point out right away that surprised me. They run the same size wheel and tires front to rear. Okay, so it's what's considered a square setup, right? Which dynamically makes sense if you have 50-50 weight distribution. So if you got a Miata or an M3, these are 50-50 weight distribution, and the physics of driving is the tire size reflects the weight distribution of the car. Okay, and that's why on those cars you can run what's considered a square setup. But if you've got a rear biased car, like a 911, or a mid-engine car like a Lotus, then you need to have larger rubber in the rear, right? There's more weight in the rear of the car. So all these safari builds are running square setup, like, what in the hell is going on here? Well, because they're off-road and grip is limited. Okay, when you're in the dirt, grip is a lot lower, and so you can run a square setup and not really notice the difference. Well, that isn't going to work on the road. So straight away, I had to throw those wheel and tire packages out the window as options for us. What we did do is lined up with Elephant Racing, and what these guys have done is develop this safari kit, which effectively, they're Bilstein shocks or struts that they valve and sprung slightly stiffer than stock. But what's really important here is it raises the car about 1 inch. So that's going to give us that ground clearance that we're shooting for. Okay? And what's really cool and interesting is some of the things that they're doing here with some of the suspension components, there's spacers that literally allow the car to come up and maintain the proper geometry for the suspension. Okay? And as you guys know, I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. So I bought that 993 in the late 90s, and I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had a track day, and it was my first track day in the Porsche. Are you guys familiar with lift throttle oversteer? Anyone here? Everyone understands what lift throttle oversteer is? Do I need to explain it? Okay, so you go into a corner a little bit too hot, you get off the gas, all right? On a rear-biased car, the rear is going to swing around. Front grips, and all of a sudden the rear loses traction, and it swings around on you. As many of you guys know, a lot of mid-engine cars, certainly a ton of rear-engine cars, this is how they wreck in the rear of the car. You exit the road and you hit a tree or a wall or something with the back of your car. It's because you've lost grip from lift throttle oversteer. Okay, so I had this in my mind. I had done many track days up to that point with BMWs with like 50-50 weight distribution, which, again, it's kind of an unfair advantage almost, okay? And it was at Talladega. Little Talladega was this racetrack in Alabama. It's actually a motorcycle course. Very tight, really not many turns. Well, it started pouring rain that morning, and I was sweating bullets. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be tough. I'm driving a rear-engine car. Oh my God, lift throttle oversteer. I was all in my head about this. Well, it turned out to be really smart because of the rain, the speeds came down. By midday, I was tightening my line through a corner by lifting off the gas when I want it and getting back on it, right? Because that's what you have to do. If you get off the gas, the rear starts coming around, you get back on the gas, boom, you'll get grip again, right? So rear engine dynamics of a car, I say this to people, some people get offended, the purists get offended by this, but a 911 is a perfect example of engineering brilliance over physics. Okay, this architecture is fundamentally flawed. Okay, if you look at what Porsche, on their full-on race cars, they're all mid-engine. There's a reason for that. Okay, but guess what? When the engineers decided to create this car, and to their credit, they fundamentally have improved this car for 50 years. Okay, this is one of the most practical sports cars you can ever buy. It's got 2 little jump seats in the back. And that's actually why I bought it in the late 90s, because I had a 2-year-old. And I have so many fond memories of her sitting in there, my helmet is in the other seat, Stacy's in the passenger side, we're taking a trip somewhere, right? So a great, reason, or advantage of this car, and another reason why, things like they put struts in the car. Okay, this is not, if you look at a sports car like a Lotus, or a Formula car, look at cars that are designed as sports cars, they're not going to run struts. But struts allow you to have really compact packaging in the front, which gives you a big old trunk in the front, right? So now all of a sudden, here's a sports car that has real practicality. Most sports cars, extreme, like that Draken has no practicality, to a sports car like this with luggage space, with room for small people in the back, and so these are some compromises engineers have to make, right? And so the dynamic of that and managing that and what we're doing are all things that we have to think about, right? So what we ultimately will do with the suspension, part of this kit is GT3 spec sway bars. Okay, so what's kind of cool about this is we're going to keep the roll stiffness of the car fairly stiff and flat handling, but we'll have the compliance in the suspension. So you hit a bump, the wheel and tires are able to absorb the bump, but the body remains reasonably flat. Okay, so it'll be very cool, the tuning that we'll do there. I think I'm a decent driver, but the truth of the matter is, when we're really doing ride and handling development, we hire a professional. One of my classmates, that's what he does for a living. He's a ride and handling engineer. And so Dave did all the development on our Draken, on the suspensions that we have on the Lotuses. He's helped us with Ariel Adams. So we'll throw him in this car. I'll get the fundamentals basically right, and then we'll put him in the car to really dial the damn thing in, because he's just on that level, right, where he's a true professional. So that, from a suspension perspective, we'll certainly be doing that. One of our key things around here has always been about lightweight. How do we pull weight out of these Lotuses, Drakens, whatever cars? Try to keep it as light as possible. And if you guys are familiar with light weighting, the advantage of lighter weight, and particularly unsprung weight, is it helps a car accelerate better, it helps a car handle better and brake better. Okay? If you add power to your car, all it really does is makes it faster in a straight line. Okay? For those of us who love every aspect of driving, I try to tell people, focus on unsprung weight first, if you can. Right? So our intention was to try to save some weight, and the Giro disc rotors that we put on the Lotuses save us 10 pounds of unsprung weight, which is pretty dramatic. On this car, it turns out there are some challenges. These cars have the handbrake in the rear of the car, which is actually a drum brake, which requires a much bigger hat. So for Giro disc to actually pull that off, they needed to actually upsize the rotor itself. So as it turns out, in the rear of the car, we're not actually saving any weight. In fact, I think we've gained about 1 pound. Okay, not a big amount, but it's still a gain. At the front, we're able to save some weight. But because they had to go larger in the rear, to match the bias, the front rotor now is bigger than stock. Okay? So, but it's lighter than stock. So that's a good thing, right? So now we have more thermal capacity, blah, 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 blah. It's vented, it's slotted. It's got all the right things that you want in a performance brake rotor. So we're excited about that. This being an old car, brake lines, of course, will be addressed as well. As many of you guys probably have heard, old rubber lines are one of those things that you want to just think about from a maintenance perspective.
I just want to ask a question. I read your post.
Uh-huh.
Your four entry on this. I was surprised. Were you able to fit the larger one, and you wanted to reduce the diameter of the rim size?
Thank you. That's a great segue to where I was going with this. Yeah. So compliance comes from a number of areas. It's not just your shocks and your springs. It can also come from the tire and wheel selection that you make. right? Most of us like +1, we like bigger wheels and tires. Designers, they always want bigger wheels and tires because it looks sexier, right? But the thing is, you're giving up compliance that comes from the sidewall of the tire, okay? There's another trade-off when you have the, like many of us go to the +1, bigger wheel, smaller sidewall tire because the turn-in's better. Like all of a sudden our steering improves, right? Well, with this car, because my goal is more compliance, I wanted to go down to 17-inch wheels. This car actually came to us with 18-inch wheels. So the challenge I'm going to have now is, can I get a 17 that's going to clear these brakes? Okay? And so we've actually got a tool that we bought that's going to allow us to kind of play around with that. I may fail. It may not work. Sadly, there's really no solution on the market right now. So I think we're going to have to ultimately custom have a solution. So we've been working with Braid. If you've heard of Braid, it's a Spanish company that does a lot of rally style wheels. Very good quality, but even they haven't done anything that specific like this particular application. So we may end up going back and forth. We may ultimately land on 18-inch wheels, and that's fine. We'll deal with that at that point, and we'll get nearly the compliance that we want. But here's a perfect example. If you look at this 964 over here, it's got much bigger wheels on it than stock. Okay, those are 18-inch wheels. And the car came with 16-inch wheels originally, right? And so you have a lot less sidewall in the tire. And this particular customer, his wife was complaining about the ride quality of this car, right? Now, his shocks were blown, so we actually have got some Bilstein PSS 10s that are going to go on this car. Plus, his tires were really old. Okay, it's something that many of us don't realize. When you have a car that you don't drive too much, you look at it and say, hey, I got plenty of tread, right? There's plenty of tread depth, but, oh, my tire's 10 years old. Well, guess what happens with rubber? It just progressively gets harder, okay? And then you lose ride quality. So the first time I really noticed that when I changed some tires on a motorcycle of mine, I was like, whoa, the compliance, right? On a bike, you're going to feel it like that. But even on cars, when you're dialed in, you'll notice. So I think just changing the tires on this car is going to make a significant difference. But the PSS 10s are going to also help us quite a bit because they're actually adjustable. So we'll be able to soften it so that when he takes a road trip with his wife, she won't be complaining.
Quick question, going back to the shocks on your 996. You said those are Bilstein, but yet they're labeled Von shock.
Yeah, so again, the core is they're Bilsteins. And so Elephant Racing revalved them to their spec, and they label them, Von shocks, like Von Dutch, right?
So bespoke valving on bump and rebound? Or
Yes, yeah, both. Okay. Yeah, both. And so it's going to be interesting. I'm curious. I think they're honestly going to work fine for really what we're doing with the car. We're not building a race car, but I do want it to work the way I want when I drive it hard in the canyons. But they're open to us requesting valving changes.
And using a linear rate versus a progressive rate?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of debate about that, but most performance guys will tell you straight away, linear is what you want because it's predictable, right? With a progressive shock, it's a bit more for comfort, because as a progressive shock, what we're talking about, progressive spring rates. Linear springs, you'll see they're kind of parallel, straight up and down, right? Progressive shocks will be fatter, or springs will be fatter in the center than on the ends. And so what happens, is you end up with a softer rate initially, and then as it compresses, it gets stiffer.
Or you can go through a cable wire or something, which is what Alpina typically does.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no end to the esoteric stuff that can be done, right? So we can geek out all day long about this stuff, but what ultimately we're trying to do is come up with something that we think is going to be a reasonable compromise for most people. If you look, these are all challenges that we're going to have to work out. Ajji's 9962 was here this week, and we had a couple things we did with that car. And one of the things that we actually did on his C2 is he was talking about the front end feel of his car. So I said, hey man, let's throw this GT3 sway bar on it, and it was amazing the difference, okay? And again, this is the difference at the limit. This is not a difference when you're just cruising around at 5/10, okay? If you're not pushing the car to 7/10, you may not notice this difference, okay? But by stiffening the rear of the car, the front was softer and it allowed the front to grip more, giving more feedback. Okay, a little bit more confidence that you feel that grip. But it didn't make the car oversteery. It was actually still quite neutral, so I was pretty pleased with how that felt. And doing a little bit of research, there's people that are taking 996 turbo rear sway bars, putting them on C2 996s, and they're raving about the performance. And so when I looked at the diameter differences between this and a turbo, I was like, hey, that's close enough. So I said, hey man, let's find a turbo sway bar, and he found one, and so we'll probably end up putting that on his car. So it'll be kind of a fun thing to do. Related, from a tuning perspective, of course we can't leave well enough alone. Right, so here's something we came up with. Manufacturers, when you design a car, it's not just about pure performance. You got to build the thing. You got to build it in a factory. That's an assembly line, and you've got workers that have to screw everything together, right? So they need access to various components. Otherwise, they're not bespoke in that way. So if you look at the rear of a 996, you're going to see space here, and they have their own subframes, like this component here, and there's a brace that goes across here. There's another couple of braces that go across to triangulate things. But you can see those braces are, well, they're designed really, again, for manufacturing. They're certainly addressing what's basically a hinge point on the car, okay, and a point that's going to twist. What you're trying to do with any chassis design is keep it as stiff as possible so then the suspension can work. Okay, if the chassis is flexing at the same time as your suspension, then it's very difficult to tune the suspension. Okay, so even though I said I'm not going to do new parts on this thing right away, we saw the opportunity and we're like, what should we do here, right? And so we came up with this crazy thing here, and we haven't tested it yet, and so there's some change that we fundamentally will make to it, but it's certainly a better brace than what comes on the car, but it may not be the right solution for everyone. Frankly, this is a solution for people who are pushing their cars hard. If you're not going to notice it. Okay, we do the same thing for these Elises. We developed a rear subframe brace for the car that fundamentally works, and that's a very stiff chassis. Okay, it's hard to imagine that you could stiffen it further. You can. Okay, there's a reason why people put half cages in their 911s, because that is kind of doing the same thing as this. Okay, the thing with the half cage is you lose your rear seats. So if you're a customer who needs a rear seat, half cage is not a great idea. This may be the better solution. So,
how many pickup points do you have?
So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, so you're tying the engine and transmission together.
Yeah, so we're basically strictly on the unibody and the subframe. Okay? So we're tying in this whole area. You see how it's just kind of an open space, right? So the way I kind of describe it with people is if you take a table with 4 legs, and if you start putting weight on the top of the table, the legs start to splay outwards, right? If you're to tie in those legs at the very bottom, and you keep putting the weight on it, it won't twist, it won't splay out, right? That's effectively what we're doing here with something like this. We're just tying in the bottom of a structure, okay? Mechanically, it makes sense in my head. Dynamically, let's see if it actually works in practice, okay? I think it's going to work. We'll find out when we actually drive the thing, okay? And see if that thing actually works. So you guys can see, we're obviously into tuning things, but reliability is one of those issues with this car that have scared a lot of people away from this car, unjustifiably so. So what we did here, and I know many of you have already come up here and seen it, but if you haven't, please come up and look. We pulled the IMS bearing, the intermediate shaft bearing, okay, which basically comes apart in about 5% of the cars that are out there. And it's created this, fear-mongering, partially by people selling bearings, but also just in the forums and the way social media is nowadays. We wanted to pull it out of this car because it had 110,000 miles on it, and it had never been changed. And so it was in perfectly good shape. You're definitely welcome to feel the bearing and see how it is. We've got some rags here you can wipe your fingers with. But we want to do that service on the car because we knew we were going to do the clutch and flywheel. We thought we would, inspect it, and sure enough, those are all worn out as well. So based on the things that we're learning about the car, I've said to some of you guys, we've lined up with a company called Slacker Race Development out of Oklahoma who's built some expertise on these water-cooled engines. And I'm meeting the owner next week in Oklahoma to be set up as an authorized installer of their built engines, okay? And they've built, he says, 100 of these engines now, and this is the bearing that he recommended that we put in this car. Okay, this is what they put in theirs. So we're going to learn quite a bit more about the engine at that point. We're not going to be building engines here. We're just going to be pulling them and installing them. Okay, but the reliability side of these cars, there really isn't that much, in my opinion, that should scare people away from the car. But what we're going to do is be set up here as a company that can help people with these cars, keep them on the roads, make them, more of what they're looking for, and frankly have fun with them, right? So that's really the key things here that we're doing with the car. Look, we're drivers first, and this business came into service from actually developing parts. And now that we see that we can help the community with service, that's exactly what our intention is. Lotus is at our core still fundamentally the cars that we will always support. Lotus is a company that's always up and down, and they're on the down again, but we're drivers, and I'm fairly agnostic when it comes to cars. I've had a picture of a 73 RS on my wall since the mid-90s. Okay, when I'll tell you a quick funny story. My daughters, I have 3 daughters, and none of them are into cars, but they all grew up in crazy fun cars, right? And they have seen that picture of that 73 RS their entire lives, okay? I owned that before I had them, right? And it's been on my wall before they arrived. And when Singer came out, it was 2011, I said to my girls, come check this car out, girls. There's a picture on the computer screen. They're like looking at these 3 little girls. Dad, what's the big deal? It's just an old Porsche. And they marched off, And I was laughing. I'm like, at least they knew it was a Porsche. So got one win. So that's really the presentation, guys. I mean, any questions?
Yeah, you said you're going to try to go to 17-inch wheels.
Yep.
More for the weight or for more sidewall on your tires?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. So look, here's the reality. When you go to smaller wheels and you get bigger tires, there's a bit of a trade-off. Bigger tires means more weight, okay? That's a heavier tire than what was on it, right? And ideally, I'm looking to try to increase the diameter of the tires. So the sizes I've selected right now, I've got the tires selected. Now I just need to get a rim that will clear the brakes.
What's the size tire?
225s at the front.
40 series, 45?
40 at the front, and at the rear, 285s.
I have a set of cup wheels if you want to try them, 17-inch.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I might hit you up on those.
Yeah, they're up 993.
Okay.
Give them a try.
Yeah. So ultimately, we've got this tool that's going to allow us to sweep the size of different wheels, and that should get us close enough. And I think we can try a couple of wheels. Look, worst case scenario, if we have to run an 18, we'll run an 18.
Correct me if I'm wrong, those Eurodisc front are 13.38, which is the same to the ceramic Porsches, which barely fit in an 18. So I think those are 13.3, the front ones.
I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that a 17 appears to be close. Because we're lifting the car as well, that's going to give us some additional clearance, but what we're really worried about is the brake and how it sweeps. Yeah. So we'll see once we get to that point.
What
Todd.
kind of tire are you thinking, given light dirt, asphalt?
I know.
Our comp, or is it more just high performance street, summer?
Yeah, high performance all season.
Oh yeah. Big all season.
Because you get more tread.
Yeah.
Look, this is going to be a street biased tire, all right? Because as you guys know, the tire is what's holding the car to the ground. That is fundamentally an important decision that you make.
Start with tires and build from there.
Yeah, I mean, that is the truth, okay? If I'm honest, okay, the dirt performance of this car is going to be lacking or lagging. Okay, it'll be better than a normal street version, but no, 100% it'll be fun like that. But you're not gonna have much grip because we're not gonna have big knobbies on it, you know. But like those kind of tires are allowed when you're cruising along too on the highway. So trade-offs with everything, guys, you know. And so you just got to decide where and what you're gonna focus on. Our intention again is to be on broken asphalt. So I want grip.
And also those sizes are 17s, because coming from LEs, like you're kind of really limited on what manufacturers still produce those sizes.
Yeah.
17s, 18s, is Porsche such a big market that you don't have the
No.
concern over limited selection?
Yeah, I thought that I was going to have a free ride on that one. No, there's, you know, it took me a long time to try to find sizes that I think is going to work.
Yeah.
So the jury's still out on that decision. But I know what I want. If I can get the 17s, that's going to work. If not, I have 18s already selected as well. Yeah. So that's, I'm probably just going to buy the 18s and run the car that way because I think the 17s are honestly a 50-50 chance. So I don't want to just sit and wait for that. I want to start doing some development. We're close enough now. What we're probably going to do, and if you guys, and I think I've talked to a few of these guys about this, but we dry ice clean the bottom of this car. So you can notice how some sections are really clean and look like new, and others are really dirty and black. Well, the entirety of this underside of this car was dirty and black. So what you're seeing is all the silver stuff that you see, that was all black before the dry ice cleaning. And if you have an older car, it's a significant investment. It's a couple of grand, but it's money well spent if you plan to keep the car for the long haul, or even if you plan to sell it, because anyone potentially buying a car that sees it looking like this is certainly going to pay a bit more money than if it was all black and greasy.
Any ideas of how to pull weight in this car?
Okay, the seats are heavy. Oh my gosh, they are really heavy. So straight away, the seats are gonna, be an easy spot for us to pull some weight out of it. This one, we put it on our scales, 3,200 pounds ish, 3,219, I think was the weight. Yeah. So anyhow, yeah, the seats are certainly an easy place to get some weight out of it. Again, it's all about how much budget do you have. We have a budget on this car. And that budget's 50 grand, like all in. Okay, so that's the car, that's the performance parts, that's everything. So it's somewhat limiting, in our ability to really yank a ton of weight out of the thing. But again, we're not building a race car. Okay, this is a car that still needs to drive down the road and be reasonably comfortable. And no, we tore the stereo out of the thing. It had big subwoofer in it and a bunch of other nonsense that we just took out of it. It'll have a stereo in it. It's going to get the Apple CarPlay, the nice solution that Porsche, so there's $2 grand that goes into that. I would normally not spend that on that, but that's what we're going to do. And so,
keep it street legal as far as
100%, 100%. Yeah, you guys may or may not have noticed the bumpers that we put on this thing. Okay. So our intention there is not to go overly aggressive like the Safari builds, but we want to do something a little bit different. And this ties right in. There's actually an internal bumper at front and rear. And that bumper on the inside is attached to 2 pistons that will absorb energy. At the front of the car, we're tied straight into those pistons. We got rid of the actual internal bumper because our tube bumper is easily as strong, if not stronger. Okay, and so the thought here is, like, if you're parallel parking in LA or something and somebody bumps your car, they're not going to destroy your fascia. Like this car's fascia has been wrecked from parallel parking in LA. And so we're going to hang a couple of driving lights from the front. We're not going to go for the full-on rally kind of lights as much as I'd like to do that. We're not. The rear, I think we'll put a rear fog light, fog lamp on it, and then we'll put tow straps on it too.
For weight, also consider going on an AGM battery.
Yeah.
I did it out my Cayman. I went from 40 pounds down to 20.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
It's sealed, and you don't have to worry about it.
Sure. Yeah, that's certainly a good idea.
Yeah, I read in Porsche Club magazine that if you run 2 pounds pressure less than all of your tires,
Yeah,
you get better grip and better ride.
sure.
Also, I found if I throw 60 pounds in front,
60?
it's a much
Oh, wait.
better ride. Yeah.
Blow your 60
Yeah,
I could put one of my kids in the front there. Yeah. So remember, car manufacturers have to deliver cars that meet emissions and mileage requirements, right? You guys all know about CAFE requirements. So they'll typically recommend higher tire pressures than would be ideal for performance guys. You lower the tire pressure, you're going to get more grip, it's more fun, but you get more tire wear, right? And then you get a class action lawsuit like Acura suffered with the NSX, where all these idiots complained about their tire wear being accelerated, right? That's the nonsense that happens in our market in this country. Okay, so yeah. What else, guys?
Have you looked at all about the C4 or turbos or
So yes, that was a big consideration. Cost and complexity is what, as well as, frankly, overall lightweight and fun of a rear drive car, since we're more road biased. If we were really going to build a safari car that was going to be off-road biased, I would go with the four-wheel drive versions. Yeah, 100%. There are some real advantages with an all-wheel drive car. Fundamental, from a performance and handling perspective, but there's some negatives too. Weight, complexity, reliability issues. I've embarrassed a lot of really fast supercars with my Evo, 20 some years ago. And, it's pretty amazing what those cars can do. But I kind of like just the simplicity of rear drive only. I think the steering feels better. It's just an overall lighter car. That's why our Draken is rear drive only. Plus we couldn't afford to do a full all-wheel drive solution on that car. Okay, what else, guys? All right. Well, thanks for.
Frame for the project?
Well, this car will be on the road for sure by the end of the year. By the end of the year. Oh yeah, this year. Yeah, not next year. No, this year, absolutely. and that's only because we're going to probably pull the engine out just to clean it and learn a bit more about the engine. That's it. We're not going to rebuild the engine. The engine it seems fine, but we'll find out when we pull it. But the intention and the game plan is to have this thing driving by the end of the year so that we can start tuning it and getting it sorted. That's exactly the intent.
Have you danced around with the idea of different transmissions for it, for weight savings or performance at all?
No, that's way beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. We still want to keep the car fundamentally stock. You know what I'm saying when it comes to the powertrain? I don't want to go into that far. Those Getrogs are actually pretty sweet gearboxes. That's actually what we run in the Draken. Same, it's a 996 gearbox in the back of that car. Yeah, they're fundamentally good. So that would be, on our first Draken, we put an OS Geek and limited slip on it, and it was a GT2 gearbox too. It was really sweet. But the gearbox, it seems fine. If it needed to be rebuilt, if it was my car, I would 100% do that. Yeah.
One last thing about also weight, consider maybe getting rid of some of that exhaust. Still keeping the cats, but get sport headers with built-in cats.
Sure.
And lighter weight mufflers.
Yeah. So these are actually an aftermarket muffler on here already.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not. Those aren't the stock mufflers.
Okay.
So
Big difference in power too.
Sure.
I noticed.
Yeah, we've got the ability to tune this with our tuner, our calibrator, but that's very low priority right now. I don't really care about more power at this stage of the game. I'm gonna get the brakes and handling right, and then we'll consider power.
Carbon fiber is too expensive.
Again, budgets, right? We got budgets. What else, guys?
Since you're getting into Porsches now, are you going to do all line of Porsches, or are you going to just target like 996, 997, like the M96, M97 motor type?
So we're going to go deep into that. But 964s, 993s, we got a ton of suppliers and support that we can do there. This car's here, we're doing suspension, brakes, other basic things to this car. So yes, we will really, if I'm honest, 997 backwards. That's really where we're going to focus. I think the 991s will eventually get to that, but 992s are still under warranty, and most people are still taking their cars to their dealers. Those cars, there's a lot more complexity, even though we've got a pretty sophisticated diag tool from Autel. The newer cars get more and more fundamentally harder and harder to manage, from a shop perspective, because you have to calibrate all sorts of weird sensors and this and that and all sorts of craziness. And, we're more analog in our interests. And frankly, from a business perspective, it's where we're going to stay focused. Yeah. No, my running joke is there's more Porsches in Southern California than there are Lotuses in North America, right? So, you know.
1 in 3 Porsches end up in SoCal.
Yeah. No, it's a huge market for Porsche. Huge, huge market. Rightfully so. You know, rightfully so. They're great cars. You know, there's Porsche. You guys remember that? Well, there's a Japanese term Kaizen, right? Continuous improvement. And this is a perfect example of that. This is the example of 50 years of continuous improvement, right? I think the best term that the Germans came up with was Fahrvergnügen for the fun and joy of driving. So we're old enough that we remember that. Some of you young guys probably don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but that was a Volkswagen campaign. Fahrvergnügen. Okay, guys. Anything else?
Body work, you can do anything on
Todd.
So the track guys talk about the X50 pan or the sump. The
Yeah.
sump in these engines versus the GT cars.
Yeah.
Is that another spot to address? Or
Yeah. So this car is not going to really see any serious track use, but I think a baffled pan is certainly something everyone should be thinking about if you go to the racetrack. You know, on the Lotuses, as you know, Todd, that car will pull 1G from the factory with factory tires. Well, at 1G, oil stands at like a 45-degree angle, and if you got a pickup sitting over here, it's just sucking air. Okay.
Built in with it.
Yes, but from my understanding, and again, I'm going to learn a lot more next week, and when I visit Slacker, the baffling that's in the standard ones is inadequate for aggressive track use.
It's very marginal.
Yeah. On the street, it'll be fine, okay? On the street, it should be fine. But when you go to the racetrack, first thing people do is they put slick tires on their cars, right? And they think, hey, yeah, I should be able to drive with slicks. Hey, man, they didn't develop it with slicks, so you have a few other considerations that you need to be thinking about.
the sport package, the X51 package?
Yep.
Had a deeper sump.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've got the 2-inch or 2-quart deeper sump on my,
Okay. Yep.
with the additional baffling. So
Sure. Sure. Well, we've got some skid plates that we're going to build underneath this car. I didn't really talk much about that, but we've got a great supplier who makes a composite material that they run in a lot of LMP and full-on prototype race cars. It looks like carbon fiber. We actually make mud flaps for the Alfa Romeo 4C from this material. Yeah. So it looks like carbon fiber, so it looks pretty cool, but it's super, super durable, really good with stone impingement. So we're going to build some, like if you see this has been ground away. I think if you guys go to LA, underground parking, it tends to go like this, and you seesaw your cars, and this one has suffered that, But we're gonna do some stuff that will provide some better underbody protection on the car, just to do it more than anything else. Yeah. What else? Well, thanks for coming, guys. Thank you. Yeah.